back to the channel. I'm the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. This is my regular Wednesday video. Yeah, I know I've had a lot of videos coming out recently. I just had some projects that I wanted to have some fun with. Halloween's always a fun time, so I wanted to do some extra stuff this year. Okay, let's do my intro. This is an art channel focusing primarily on my free, not safe for work webcomic Dark Horse, links down in the description, but I also talk about a myriad of other art projects targeting an adult audience. Real quick, just regarding Friday's video, I noticed that comments aren't allowed. I don't know why. YouTube is stupid. I'm like cussing in that video. It's very clearly not directed towards children, but I guess they think it is, so they took the comments off. They didn't even give me any explanation or anything. Can I say that word? Explanation or anything? I have no idea. I can only surmise that is why they took the comments off. Not that, you know, there's much to comment on it anyway, but sorry about that, y'all. We will be getting back to our normal schedule. I do have a video that I'm working on. It's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a long one. Because, you know, just like every artist, well, just about every artist out there, I've got a lot of commentary and thoughts that I'm trying to string together for a video regarding AI graphics, graphic production generators. I have no idea when that's coming out, but it is something that I'm working on, and it's going to be a long one. But for the most part, I'm going back to like my Wednesday schedule. This week, if you can't tell from the background, I'm working on a comic page. This is from my Dark Horse submission to the Aradia Beat Zine. Oh my gosh, we're getting so close to having the Kickstarter begin. So I will be giving you all information on that. I know I keep like stringing you along. It's just they're they're working on the page and everything. It's coming very soon, the Kickstarter. So until then, I will continue to talk about this process, although I only have like a couple more videos left that I really like. I have a little bit of footage from like the first page of how I spent my vacation, which was my submission, aside from like a poster that I did. And then I also have like a video on vectors that I want to do. And when I say on vectors, don't think that I'm giving any tutorials, y'all. Not on this. I'm not good enough. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not practiced enough. But I will be talking about my experience and talking about some logos and text and stuff that I created. So that's to come. But anyway, let's talk about now. Let's talk about the here. In some of my past videos, like my Maho transformation video, which is from, I think, October. I had that posted in October. I said that I wanted to talk about the color scheme that I worked on, or what my inspiration and all that was for the color scheme. And I also said that I was going to touch upon what I meant by working on panels separately. There's not much to really say on that, but you'll notice with this page, with the black and white page, I think I have about like maybe 7 panels, technically. I've been trying to follow like the Scott McCloud suggestion of limiting your page to around 6 panels maximum, with a couple exceptions. I was very squeezed for pages because I had decided to do a poster. I probably should have just instead done like an extra page for this story, but I didn't. So that's that. That's something to reflect on. But in my video on how I spent my vacation, which was posted back in September, I was talking about how in order to work to the best of my ability, I was trying very hard to... Because I have an issue with scaling, sometimes it's very difficult for me to draw things that are small, very small. Enlarging things is a little bit easier for me because in some art classes, and just because I have like some very large like art pads. But when it comes to drawing smaller, even when I have a very fine point, like one of my smaller mechanical pencils, it can be very difficult for me to get the detail and proportions that look natural to my style. And I can throw up a couple examples of what I'm talking about. It's hard for me to get the characters to look right. So on those occasions, and specifically for this zine, rather than trying to force myself to draw in something that was uncomfortable for me and was going to be time consuming, while it's still time consuming, I instead would draw each individual panel on its own separate piece of paper. Or maybe I would have 2 panels on a single 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And the reason for that, as I've been trying to kind of elucidate to you all is because it would be easier for me to scale that in the computer, working on a more comfortable scaling for myself in like the traditional medium, and then scaling things down once I get it into the computer and fitting it into the page dimensions that are required, the panel dimensions required for that specific page. So this page is a really good example of that. Like, the dude was drawn separately than, like, his entire body, well, just about his entire body. I didn't really need, like, his full body for this comic. But majority of his body I drew completely separate from all the other panels. And then, like, the girls in the top, I drew them together, but I drew them separately from the image of Kana standing in the very bottom lower right-hand corner, or I should say the right-hand side, last panel. That was drawn separately. Every element on this was done separately and then combined digitally in the computer, just so that I could ensure a little bit of quality control with like the facial features and the proportions. Although I will do a little bit of self-criticism. I know that Kana's stance is very static, especially as opposed to Rina, who's, you know, got like a little bit of a pose going on. Part of that is due to a lack of skill, of course. I'm not gonna, like, play it off as, you know, I'm telling it like it is. I'm not gonna play it off as though that's not, like, the case. But also, maybe I'm being a little bit too realistic, but kimonos aren't really something that you have a lot of free range of motion when you're in them. So that was also kind of part of why she does look so static. Although I tried to make up for that by having, like, her hair blowing a little bit. I thought that might make her look a little bit, you know, in motion. But another thing that I kind of had in mind, and maybe I'm wrong in trying this, but there's a very poignant difference between Rina's outgoing, energetic personality and Kana's more reserved, kind of self-restrained personality, which I think is evident. I feel like that should be evident, but it, you know, even then, like, Kana, it's not like she's, like, super shy, but I just wanted that to kind of reflect, you know, their personalities a little bit. So maybe it was successful, maybe it's not. There was a reason behind it, but even though there's a reason behind it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it works. I said that I was going to talk about that in a video, so I figured I would touch upon that in this week's video, since it has, like, the best example of what I was trying to demonstrate or kind of get to in that September video, how I spent my vacation. I also wanted to talk about the color scheme. Oh my gosh. Y'all, I have so much I could say about the color scheme. I, first and foremost, had so much fun coming up with this scheme. Originally, I was going to color things. I didn't really know what palette I wanted to use, but originally I was, like in the How I Spent My Vacation video, was going to just color their skin and clothes like the color that they would have been wearing and what their skin tone is, blah blah blah. But as I started working on it, I actually started working on it with page 1 of this zine submission. Sometimes if you do colors realistically, it can be very boring, especially when you're in a medium that's, like, you know, artistic. Like, it's not, I mean, even with photographs, you know, there's something to be said about contrast, and sometimes people will tweak colors to be, like, completely unrealistic to look really cool. So when it came to this, I started coloring it and I was like, well, maybe I'll just kind of make the background monochromatic, or maybe I'll just do monochromatic as I did with my comic theory zine submission to the Not Safe for Work zine last year, I think it was, when we had the Summer in the City zine. But I kind of wanted to do something different. I mean, I like doing things like that. I like working monochromatically. I think it has a really cool effect. But for this, I really wanted to push myself and do something that was going to be different, do something that was going to stand out. And you saw a little bit of what I was talking about in the Maho transformation video. If you haven't seen that and you want to watch it, it's not too terribly long, it's like 14 minutes. But you can see, like, how I was coloring Rina and things look very psychedelic. that's kind of indicative of this entire submission. And there's a couple things that kind of led me down this route. Whenever I was getting frustrated and kind of trying to brainstorm for something that would be really something that would pack a punch, I guess is what I'm trying to say, I decided to look up color schemes first. So I looked up color schemes, and you get your little color swatches and whatever, and I was like, nothing here is really like speaking to me. And I really didn't want to do pastel, because I think a lot of, pastel gets it's very popular to use with like the maho genre, with the magical girl genre. So, and this isn't me like shitting on that or anything. I like pastel colors. I think they look very nice. I think they work very well with the genre. But this was not just a magical girl zine. It's specifically, the topic specifically is magical girls in the 90s. Magical people. When I say girls, it's all inclusive. That's just the name of the genre. It's inclusive to all walks of life. So I should probably say that early on in this video, even though it's not really. Not early on. But anyway, I digress. So I really wanted to encompass like a 90s feel. And I was trying to remember, what was like really, what would stand out and what would feel really 90s to me. When I was younger, and I think I did talk about this in one of my other videos, I was really big into like 1960s pop culture, especially like from the late 90s on. Actually mid 90s, I would say. Although a lot of that stuff I wasn't really allowed to watch until the late 90s. Like I started getting into the Beatles in 1996 when I would have been in 6th grade. And my parents were, they aren't really even strict. They just were very careful about what we were allowed to watch at certain ages. As soon as I like got to be like in middle school and into high school, like mom like let up on like the restrictions a hell of a lot. And I mean, I'm thinking like I just rewatched Ninja Scroll last night at time of recording, and I'm like, wow, she didn't know I watched this, but like she let me rent that. Like my sister and I watched it, I think, together. And I'm like, holy shit, this is really. I mean, but anyway, I'm digressing. I'm bringing that up because 1960s nostalgia was starting to become very big, as I mentioned in, I think, my Maho transformation video. For the longest time, I still had, like, just extra copies of the 60s post office vote, vote for your stamp, vote for whatever stamp you want. And it was very, like, Peter Max inspired with all these bright colors. But in addition to that, I was kind of part of that subculture that liked the black light posters. We had films like Dazed and Confused. You watch Empire Records, which, oh my god, Empire Records, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Clueless. These are movies that my sister and I watched over and over and over. I mean, like, we also had, like, the 80s flicks that we watched a ton. Like, she liked shit like Pretty in Pink and Crybaby and stuff like that. Like, I've seen those movies also and enjoyed them. And, we also had, like, the stuff like Stand By Me we watched over and over again. Lost Boys. Anything with Corey Feldman and what's his name? Corey Haines. We watched a lot of that stuff, too. But when I was a little bit older in the 90s, that was when, we had, like, this whole, like, 60s resurgence. So, like, I watched a ton of stoner movies. And in addition to that, you also had very colorful films like Bebe's Kids, animated films. Anything that was cartoons, just about. Like, aside from when I was real young, Mom wouldn't let me watch some Ralph Bakshi cartoons. Like, I could watch The Lord of the Rings. That was okay. That was allowed. But it wasn't until I was older that I was allowed to watch some of his other films, like Wizards. I think I maybe saw when I was in 8th grade. Maybe I was in 9th grade. I might have been a freshman by the time she let me watch Wizards, because even that is a little risque. But I'm just trying to kind of give you an idea of, like, some of the things that were popular that were finally becoming available. Like, some of these films were being put out on VHS or being reissued, or we were finding them in the video store or something like that. So my mom was very much big into like letting us watch animation so long as we were old enough for it. And I remember watching Bebe's Kids like over and over and over to the extent that like we were quoting it, you know, like to our cousins and stuff, because we lived out, you know, in the middle of nowhere, so that's who we were quoting these films to. Yeah, and then you think about stuff like In Living Color was very popular in the 90s, and all of these forms of pop culture were very brightly colored. Like the clothing was brightly colored in a lot of these things. Especially like rewatching Buffy, like dude, like that bright yellow coat, like that stood out to me, like the yellow coat in Buffy. I'm like, yes, and just the mismatched colored jean pockets, everything's colored differently, or there's like lines and stuff in the pockets. All of this was very color poppy. So I was thinking about like films that were popular at the time period. I was thinking about animation, you know, animated films as well as cartoons, but mostly animated films. And I was also, you know, trying to think about like what are some popular anime that came about at around that time. So I mean, you had things, you know, like I was watching, you know, you could sometimes find a VHS, or you could, I didn't have internet until 1999, so that was, you know, I didn't have access to a lot of things, but I was able to see, like, Magic Knight Ray Earth. I think they had a VHS of that. Very colorful. Each character has a color that's kind of assigned to them. Or Yu Yu Hakusho. Very colorful. Slayers! Oh my god, the Slayers movie, yeah. They had that at the video store. Let's see, Tenchi Muyo I didn't see till high school. Princess Mononoke actually came out in like 1997. I'm not sure if I saw it until college, but I feel like I saw it I feel like I saw it, and that was one of the things that really started getting me into anime right around the cusp of, you know, graduating high school. But it actually came out in 97, which would have been, like, before I was in high school. Anyway, like, when you look at a lot of these animes, more realistically, Record of Lodoss War, that was something that I saw at the video store that I got, and I rented, and I loved the shit out of. And it was fairly colorful, I would say. At least from my memory. Like, I remember Dietlitz's, like, green outfit. And I remember, I can't remember the dude's name, but the kind of gold armor. I feel like it was gold, but you know how memory is, y'all. But I mean, there's just a lot of colors that were found in animes. So these were some of the things that is like, you know, psychedelia, brightly lit colors. These are things that really speak to me and were influential to me when I was younger. I loved bright colors. I wore clothes like Cyndi Lauper. I had, you know, polka dot dresses, and I know she's a little bit more 80s, but as we blend into the 90s, you know, as we move into things like genres and eras, they don't just disappear. So there were still like a lot of really bright colors, even though towards my high school days, I started getting more into Daria, wearing like darker colors and being a little bit more pessimistic, you know, stuff like that, dressing like the Matrix, that kind of thing, you know. But like when I'm thinking of the 90s, the bright colors is what I think of. That's where my mind directly goes to. So I typed into my Ecosia search engine just psychedelic comics, and once that clicked, once I got there, wow, I totally knew exactly where I wanted to go with this. I was thinking Liechtenstein, I was thinking Andy Warhol, I was thinking let's go the whole like pop art spectrum. Let's look at some of this these 70s Thor psychedelic colors, or it might have been 1960s. But also like this one thing that came up specifically was I kept seeing these pages from this comic book called Chris Cool. Now, I'm going to put up a trigger warning right now. First and foremost, I ended up getting a copy of this book, And while it's extremely dated, arguably misogynistic, definitely misogynistic, but not in a way that I personally was not offended, but I know that there's probably a lot of gals out there who would not enjoy this at all. If you could get the French version, or if you could just look at the pages and not even read the text, this comic is a feast for the eyes. And I went out and I went to Floating World Comics and I immediately bought a copy of this because I knew it was going to be right up my alley. It is quite a trip, and I'm just going to say that while I was a little bit, I don't take things personally because the dude was like in his 20s when he made this comic. It's his first comic. It was the 1960s, so of course it doesn't excuse it, but I'm not surprised that it's very sexist. But at the same time, at least it was sexist in the way that, he was trying to pleasure women. I don't even want to excuse it. I had a good time reading it, even though I rolled my eyes quite often. Let's put it that way. And if you're someone who's like not offended by that kind of thing, there is so much to be learned from this comic. I'm actually probably going to do a video, I don't know that I want to do like a review of it. I just kind of want to like do a video kind of gushing about it. But the colors are very psychedelic. And so that was what solidified my choice. I was like, yes, this is vomiting colors. This is vomiting rainbows. This is Lisa Frank. This is everything I feel the 90s in some ways tried to mimic with a lot of their advertising. I mean, even when I look at like the opening for like JoJo's Bizarre Adventures with for Stone Ocean, like that kind of pop art looking thing, even though I think that's actually set in like the 2000s, that feels very 90s to me. Very 90s, even a little bit 80s, because I remember like lips and telephones and thunderbolts being very popular as like decorative elements on folders and shit, you know what I'm saying? So while it was 60s, I felt that it was going to be very applicable and that I could take this and use it as inspiration for my own comic submission here. So while I'm working on this page, which by the way, coloring alone took 5 hours. So I was working on the background, and then I was doing all the coloring and shading, and as I've said in other videos, I'm trying to put like my best foot forward for this zine. Even though there's still elements that, leave room for improvement, that's always going to be the case, especially with me. I will always try to improve, but I know that I will always have room to improve. But at the same time, like, I wanted to do something very bright, very poppy. I wanted my comic, well, everybody's comic, I've seen other people's, well, actually no, people hadn't really gotten their stuff in yet. But the few people who'd kind of hinted at what their colors were going to be, I was like, wow, that's really good use of colors. What am I gonna do? Like, I think that's one of the things that maybe frustrated me. I think I saw one other person's submission and I was like, their use of color is really fucking good. How am I going to compete with it? Like, not compete, but how am I going to complement or even stand out at all? Or even, feel like my comic is on the same level as anybody else's if I'm doing this boring ass realistic color scheme. So yeah, that really helped solidify what my color scheme was going to be. I, in the back of my mind, had remembered after I decided what my color scheme was going to be, after looking at those references, I remembered watching a video about lesser known or more rare color schemes. Color theory, I should say. And I'll actually I'll put it in the iCard, and I will also have like a video link to it, but it's this video by Winged Canvas. 10 color schemes you've probably never heard of. They don't go into much detail about it, but I came back to this video and I looked at what they were talking about with the polychromatic color scheme. A lot of times when you're in early college, they want you to stay away from using too many colors. until you've learned enough about color theory to be able to combine the rainbow in a tasteful way. Not with Skittles. I'm just kidding. Bad joke. I'm sorry. I highly recommend that video to anyone just interested, because then from there you can maybe like look at the examples and then learn how to do it yourself maybe. I rewatched that video and I decided how I was going to organize my colors for each character was to kind of have them have a prevailing theme and to try to abide by a color combination for each character that I thought looked good. So for both Rina and Kana in this page that I'm working on, you'll notice that they are variations of primary colors. Kana, I mean, there's a little bit of purple with Kana, but her hair is like a fuchsia pink, and her skin is kind of a violet, well, not violet, but is in the purple realm, which I chose because when you mix blue and red, it makes kind of a purple color. So that's primarily what her scheme is, aside from like the yellow. So just a tiny bit of yellow for like what would be gold, and then like red, and then a bit of blue. Those are kind of like her color scheme. And that's even true like with other pages. Like her jumpsuit, instead of just being a blue denim, I made it pink to kind of complement that. She had like a blue shirt on, she had a blue ponytailer, and then that purple skin. There's a method to my madness is what I'm essentially saying. With Rina in this page, she's much brighter primary colors, I feel. Like she's got the bright red hair, she's got a definitely more saturated blue, and then she's got the yellow. And then her skin is like a light blue. Her light blue skin, it almost looks periwinkle because it's flirting with purple, but it is blue. It is in the blue hue family. But, I mean, that's kind of how I went about the colors. The main antagonist on this page, his color scheme, I decided I wanted him to be very orange and yellow and red. His skin is like a very light pink, his eyes are red. Shading I did throughout was purple. I didn't want to use black. I wanted to make sure that everything was very colorful, aside from choice places where I used white. But yeah, his color scheme, I kept it in kind of like colors that kind of blend into each other, like yellow, orange, towards red, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And that's kind of how I chose to organize the colors. And then like with the backgrounds, I tried to find colors that I felt would look good. When we get to the end of this video and you see what I did with the background for the top panel, I intentionally used a gradation and I tried to use colors that would help the characters stand out. One other thing that I did, specifically speaking to the backgrounds, I really liked that halftone color pattern. I was talking about that a little bit with like Lichtenstein, which by the way, if you don't know who Lichtenstein is, he's an artist that really helped popularize just taking like comic book panels and painting them for like the fine, quote unquote, fine art studio scene. And that was part of the pop art movement. So that's who I'm talking about. If you've seen Girl with the Ribbon, or I think that's the name of it, Girl with the Ribbon, or a lot of times you might have seen like maybe somebody had painted like something that looks like a comic book panel. That is probably Lichtenstein, or possibly influenced by what he did. Or maybe it's just influenced by comic books. I don't know. What am I talking about? What do I know? What do I know, y'all? But at any rate, I really liked that half-tone color pattern. And I felt that that would really help punctuate like the 90s feel, the old school comic book feel, when they still had to do dot matrix printing. Real quick correction, I think I'm using dot matrix inaccurately. Dot matrix is more talking about like the printers that use dots to type words. This is a thing. We used to have one. I'm sorry, it's too complex to explain, but I'm using dot matrix incorrectly. Halftones and color halftones are a little bit more in line with like the screen tones that you see mangaka using sometimes even still today. that's apparently how they used to do like a lot of the colors. Essentially, this little aside is I'm using dot matrix wrong. So please, anytime you hear that, just insert color halftone. Okay, sorry about that. Back to the video. And the other reason why I decided what I was gonna do is I was gonna have every single background, I was going to apply that filter, that halftone color or color halftone pattern filter to every background. That in part, as I mentioned, was to pay homage to the way comics used to be printed, the comic books that I grew up with. But the other reason why I wanted to do this was to help make the characters or the primary focus in the foreground really pop out. So I think that doing that, at least I feel, really helped you kind of zoom in and zone in on the characters as opposed to being hyper focused on the background. It helped to kind of soften the background up a little bit rather than using like a blur to make it seem out of focus. I just went ahead and did like color halftone across the board. And I also felt that would help unite the pages because there are times throughout this submission I have kind of like a theme with the background. Like if you look at this page, the villain in the middle, in the bottom section of the page, he has a red background. He's angry, he's manic, he's demanding this, ransom for these children. Then I move into like the purple. I'm transitioning down. The mood is changing to more kind of like a confused, kind of like what the heck's going on. I wanted the colors to be purple there. And then by the bottom panel, it's blue because he's totally been deflated. He has no idea what the heck's going on and like Kana has essentially just taken the steam out of his sails. So I do that in a couple different places. Like there's another page where I have Kana is irritable. She's irritated with Rina because Rina's trying to get her to do something she doesn't want to do, which Rina does quite a bit in the comic Dark Horse. So we've got Kana, she has the red background or a reddish background, a more intense, warm, heated background. Then we switch to like Rina and it's like a cooler, more pleading, whatever color, whatever I feel helps to kind of embrace that emotion. And then as temperatures rise, we see like I have a panel of Kana kind of losing her shit even though she's giving in, and the color is bright red with lightning bolts in the background. Because I kind of change up the background like that, I thought that adding the color halftone to it would help unite all of the pages together, even though it's a little bit different, obviously, in each page. I don't know if that's a success. I don't know if that's successful, but that was kind of the impetus behind what I was doing. And personally, I think that these pages turned out really well. I am very proud of my work on this zine. I'm going to pat myself on the back. A lot of times I'm a little bit demeaning to myself. Some of that is just to keep me a little bit humble, but some of it's like just being real. I like to be real with myself. I don't like to lie to myself. I don't want to like tell myself that something's great, but I also don't like usually feel like shit after I say, hey, I could have some improvement from this, but it's the best of my ability. For this specific zine submission, I'm not just saying this to sell the zine and the Kickstarter when it starts. I brought forth my A game, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit of credit. I think I did really well with this submission, and after about 2 months, I can actually, well, I should say 2 months after the zine gets printed and mailed out and we're allowed to show the submission, I will try to remember to have it here on this channel for anyone who's interested. But if you want to see it ahead of time, keep an eye out for when the Kickstarter begins, because we could really use your support. This is not going to get printed unless we get the support of, people like you who are interested in, independent artists and independent projects. So I will be talking about that in more detail once the page is live, and I'll be directing people there, and you're probably going to get sick of hearing about it, y'all. I'm going to be advertising it a lot. I will be talking about different things in other videos, but I was just so proud of this submission. I really think that this page, not just this page, but this entire zine submission, How I Spent My Vacation, it's a little rushed, and when I say rushed, I mean the pacing's a little rushed because of how many pages I had. But I think I did a really good job on this, and I cannot wait to share it with you all. And if you cannot wait to see it, please, please, please keep an eye out for when I start advertising the Kickstarter. Please. Okay, this is a really long video. My other videos recently have been kind of short, so I'm going to kind of indulge myself because I wanted to talk in more detail about what my thoughts were behind doing all of this. It was a very experimental submission, but I think I succeeded in creating something that packs a punch, embodies the 1990s nostalgia. I mean, you know, I lived it. I was there. Even though memory's a little bit faulty at times, I feel like I very successfully captured some of my own nostalgia, and I had just so much fun working on this. And I did this video, I talked about all of these things, and I haven't even talked about like all of my 90s like homages that are found in the comic itself. That's a whole other video. I may talk about it after the zine, you know, after I'm allowed to kind of show the project and show it off to everyone. So maybe I'll save that for another day. I will save that for another day. But if you like my videos, that's the end of this one. Thank you for sitting through this. Who out there listened to the end? I'm kind of curious if somebody out there actually listened to the end of this video, maybe put like a wand emoji or like a witch emoji or something like that down in the description. I'm gonna be real depressed because there's not gonna be anyone who posts any emoji. But anyway, if you want to support the channel or my comic, anything like that, I got links down in the description. One-time donations with Ko-fi, or you can join a subscription-based thing like Subscribestar or Patreon, all of which is, you know, very much appreciated. Thank you. I'm gonna end this video. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching. I wish you all peace and love, fare you well, and keep on trucking.